Hi, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Gail, and we are delighted to welcome Katharine Esty to our show this afternoon. Dr. Katharine Esty is a social psychologist, a best-selling author, and an expert on aging well and finding purpose. She's focused on creating a new understanding of possibilities for living into old age. Her website, katharineesty.com, is a wealth of information. And at 87, Katharine now lives in a retirement community on the East Coast. As Katharine turned 80, her age began to affect her. And so she interviewed 128 people in their 80s, along with 26 of their adult children. Key findings from her conversations emphasize that people in their 80s are flourishing and are unexpectedly happy. So, Katharine, welcome to Women Over 70, Aging Reimagined. You've lived your whole life, in your own words, as a pilgrim. And tell us what that means and a little bit about your early life. You have 4 sons and a supportive husband, had a supportive husband, and how did all of that shape your interests and lead you to become the change agent you are?
Okay, well, first I just want to say I'm absolutely thrilled to be on this show, this Women Over 70. It's so that's to start off. But I have been a pilgrim and a seeker, I think, all my life. I've always kind of seen that things could be better. And sometimes that got me into a little trouble. It still does. But I always wanted the world to be different, the teacher to be nicer. And I had learned over my long life, I kind of honed my skills so that I could actually be an effective change agent. And the pilgrim part is that I've really, in my life, I've had the luck, the opportunity of having many stages in my life. Unlike some people who settle in, I have a restless quality to me. I started out, as a teacher, and then I had stayed home for 9 years taking care of my kids, my 4 boys. That was probably the hardest stretch because I'm so glad I did it. It was, makes me very happy. But it was just, I had so much energy that I was just bursting to sort of get going on a career. And then I started with a social worker and went to work for 10 years in a community mental health center and was a psychotherapist and a manager. And I was truly happy at those 10 years. I felt I was right where I should be. It was a blue collar community. And and that's where I learned how to be in the workplace and a lot more about who I was. And after that, I decided to go back to school. And then I worked in a consulting firm as a social psychologist, which, unlike being a psychotherapist, where you're mostly talking about the individual person, as a social psychologist, I was interested in making organizations better. And I soon found out how hard that is. It's easier when you're working with a single person, but I worked in a consulting firm those 3 years, and then 2 other women and myself started a firm that was an organizational consulting firm, helping organizations be more effective. But primarily, we were looking at diversity in the world, trying to get more women, and this was in the 70s, more women and more people of color in the workplace. And I stayed in that. My company which was called IBIS Consulting Group, still goes on, but I left when I was about in the early 70s. But I always kept my license to be a therapist, and I figured that the last stage here, having done the organizational thing, and that what was great about the organizational phase and at IBIS was I actually had clients all over the United States, universities, big businesses, Fortune 500, and then had the real just luck and pleasure to work for UNICEF and some UN agencies. And that took me to Bangladesh, the third world, Ethiopia, Jordan, all kinds of places that I had never been. This was my 50s then when I was doing that. My husband was supportive, and I'd go off for 2 weeks to run uh, strategic planning conferences, and he was all for it. So then but when I got to be 70, I thought, well, I'll have a quieter career. So I picked up my psychotherapy license and got an office and sat, and I've been doing that. I actually just retired from my psychotherapy
Really?
practice this November 12th. When,
Oh
when
my goodness, really?
so I loved work, and I think that's one of the things I found. The pleasure of work for me has been great. So that that sort of gives you the pilgrimage. I was a wanderer. I was a seeker, and I also, a pilgrimage has a sense that there's some holy grail somewhere that you're going to get to. And I think for me, it's seeing a world that is better to women, better to people of color, better to all, and now better to older people.
Wow. Yeah. So life, wow, that was quite a life you had. And you made quite a difference in the people's lives that you worked with and the organizations that you worked with. And so I understand that in 2015, your husband John passed away.
He
And
did.
yeah, and so in what ways did that affect you? Now you were already in your 80s, is that right?
Right. I was just turning 80, and I think I was 80, just 80. And
Mhm.
it was a turning point. It was a big, huge, major event psychologically, practically, and all of my psychological know-how didn't help me skate through it. I mean, I was somehow taken back. It was just a really a tsunami of the experience. Um, so I uh, was really I felt gray, that the whole, just like that there was this gray wave. But I did, I was in a retirement community, and one of the things about a community like that is there is a culture of kindness. So people were very kind, and my sons rallied around. Although uh, I have come to see, and I kid them, that the people here that have one daughter, you often get daily attention from the daughter. And so I kind of say that four sons are about equal to one daughter in terms of communication. But my four sons have been fabulous. And but what really helped me get through was uh, I was in a little tiny support group of three people, and the three of us were all losing our spouses. And so and then we went right through the whole period of losing them. They were all kind of in that year. And we would meet and cry and just grieve. And I think what I learned was how to grieve. And that group where we sat together and cried, allowed ourselves to, was just wonderful. And after months and months of crying, then one day one of us said, we could really do something fun. And we were all shocked. So this was it was a one woman and one man, and so the three of us made an odd little party and went to Puerto Rico for a week. And we could see in our society that was not a usual thing. First of all, everybody kept giving Peter the bills. Even though Carol, the other person, was the one that was doing the arrangements, and people kept trying to figure out which of us went with Peter. And so anyway, it was so that was when I did find out that getting help for yourself really works.
Right. I'm curious, how long before this had you moved to the
Uh,
retirement facility?
I think it was about 3 or 4 years, 3 years maybe. And so my husband had a good. We'd come because he was failing. He had kidney problems, and so but these were new people to me. But
Sure, that was a great thing to do, to plan it that way. So both of us are very intrigued. Both Catherine and I are very intrigued about your book, your latest book, 80 somethings. there it is, a practical guide to letting go, aging well, and finding unexpected happiness. So tell us about that process. And I know you interviewed a lot of people. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the way it got started, Gail, is I was that summer I was 80. My husband had died. I was up at my summer place in the Adirondacks, and I was still in a major funk. I was still the grayness, the tsunami of sadness. But I was going through activities, and the kids said, "Let's go." There were a bunch of grandkids, a bunch of kids. I think three of my sons were there. They said, "Let's. This is a Cat Mountain Day. We're going to take this hike." So I'd done that for 40 years, and it was a small mountain, really a very small mountain. People in California would laugh to call it a mountain, but we went and. Went and I started out and it had rained and I slipped and I kind of scraped my knee and it bled and then I fell again. And when we got to the base of the really steep part where it's a bit of a scramble, you do have to kind of hold on with and be on all fours. I just had this sinking feeling that for the first time in my life, I actually couldn't power through. And my grandkids we were talking about how I was so strong. I could do push-ups. I thought of myself maybe that I could, and I usually sort of felt, well, I can just power through, and I couldn't. So I sat down on a stump and I realized, I wasn't going to be able to just keep doing everything. I was getting old. And I kind of said to myself, it suddenly came to me with this sort of powerful aha that I couldn't go on doing everything I'd done before. And I had to do something different. And, but I sat on that stump and everybody else went up on the mountain, had lunch. And one of my sons sat with me and I couldn't move. I was like, paralyzed at the moment. But after about an hour, gradually I kind of realized what was happening. And I realized that I had something to learn. And I kind of thought, I can get through this and I can adapt. And I don't have to be super Katharine, super mom, super grandma. And so that was the beginning. And I thought, and so I said, well, I got to find out. Somebody must know how to get through this. There must be some answers. And so I thought, well, I'll interview people. And I also went to the internet and interviewed on aging. I found out, how many people are in the 80s. I realized I was looking for a book on 80s, and the books were all being old or, how to live well, but they were 65 to 100. And nobody had looked at that decade and sort of held a microscope up to kind of taking it apart. So I got more and more interested in thinking about what is the 80s experience, what is it like, and how is it different, and what can I make of it? And so I started, and the people I met were just amazing. That I was looking for people that were flourishing, but I found them, so I went ahead and started out interviewing people that I didn't know in my retirement community, and then I went to the local people around and in the different council on agings, and then for the next 2 years, whenever I traveled to visit a person or I would interview people in their 80s. I was very clear. I didn't want anyone 91 or 79. I wanted just the 80 to explore the 80 experience. And so I went to California and Ohio and Pennsylvania. And then I started doing when I got recommendations from everybody I interviewed, and I was wanting to get more people of course, when I got people that were flourishing, I didn't go for people that were in poverty. I thought, well, that's another book to have old age and poverty. I thought, and it wasn't a national sample, of course, because 128 is not nearly big enough to get all the ethnicities and all the different. But I wanted to get men and women. Economically well off and some that were in nursing homes and not doing so well. And I was able to do that. And what I found out was I learned that my picture of old age was completely out of date. I needed to do a complete revision.
Wow. So in what ways did you find that it was out of date? How did you begin to think about it differently?
Well, I first realized that my image of it had come from my own grandparents. And back when my childhood was mostly in the 40s, and back then most people died about 65. So that, and that my grandparents weren't thriving or flourishing. My one grandfather had a stroke and was in bed, and then he did die at 65. My other grandfather had died. He was older. He also died at 65, but I'd never met him. Uh, my grandmother then, who was living, I had two grandmothers living, but the one broke her hip and she also became bedridden. And then one grandmother was able to do things. She had a pretty good life, and could work on her rose garden and go to Florida in the winter to see her sister. But there was a pretty grim picture I had of what I could look forward to as being old. It was kind of decline and illness, and it kind of made me dread. I think it was part of my funk. I was dreading being old and thinking, oh my goodness. So I learned, first of all, that so many things had happened. For example, just modern medicine means that we're living longer, and now there are more than 11 million people in their 80s, and it's growing every year exponentially. We're growing faster than any other decade in the country. So I learned I thought about and began to see what's changed things is like medicine. Modern medicine is completely different. That people with hips get well and then they walk, and that we have new shoulders and new knees and new hips and new cataracts, new eyes, and it's just there's such possibilities that 80s no longer, or even after 65, it's no longer a picture of decline, and necessarily. Now, there are people that have dementia, there are people that do have sicknesses, but there are many millions of people that are having active, you know, uh, care, pain-free lives. So that's a start on how the picture changed for me. I thought so there's much has changed.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you know that you were going to write a book when you started interviewing these people?
I didn't. I thought I wanted to learn more. I was really looking for answers for myself. But as I started it, and this is a really good question, because as I started, I began to change. I started to pick up, from my gray moods. It was like getting water on a wilted flower. I was suddenly feeling good. And
Right.
and as I did it, I realized, well, I've got a new purpose. It was like I suddenly came to, and as I interviewed, I thought, well, there is no book that's been written, and I had written some earlier books but I thought I can do this, and I kept having the nightmare that somebody really had written the book and it was going to emerge. I'd go every Sunday to the paper and see if it'd come out, but it didn't, and so I was lucky to get a publisher, and it worked out to be a book, but I had no idea that I would. I knew I was a writer. I had but I had written. This was my fourth book. I had written like one book every 15 years. It wasn't like I churned them out. I read about the woman that had written 400 books. Have you heard about her?
But Katharine, you wrote this in a very story-like approach. I mean, you tell really rich, detailed stories of many of your interviewees. And is that a style that your other books, or is this a different style for you now?
I think it's more a different story. I mean, the other books, I did write a history of a popular history of gypsies, and I did some of that. And I think it came from my psychotherapy work, where every client is a story, and that I sort of see it that way. And but and I've been in a writing group that helped me write the book, and they've been just fabulous, going so that everything that I wrote, they would say, well, that doesn't make sense, or I can't understand that, and so we could sort of vet, and they say this isn't clear. So that's how the kind of help I got, and we've been together for 9 years.
Uh-huh. And so, Katharine, do you have a question?
Well, I was so interested in what you found out. And one of your surprises, as you said, was that people are much happier than you had anticipated. And you talk about why is that? And part of that, you said, was because they have more, if they're involved in things, they have responsibility for something, they have a purpose. And
You're exactly right, Katharine. That the biggest finding when what I learned was that they all needed to catch up on this new vision, but that the surprise, and that's why in the title of the book it says unexpected happiness. Nobody expects to be happy in their 80s, and I found even the people in quite dismal settings like nursing homes, most of them, there were some that were grumpy and unhappy, but they're in the book too. But because I didn't want it to be a Pollyanna-ish, it isn't fair. And there are people that have many more health problems than I had, and but the happiness is really striking. That I asked every single person I interviewed, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And they were all 8s and 9s, and 10s, except for maybe fewer than 10% would be a 4 or a 5 or a 3 or anything like that.
And what are elements of that happiness?
Well, the happiness, I think it's psychological. Again, of course, I'm a psychologist, but I think it's people they begin to be grateful for just being alive, that, you see, especially when you're 80, half of the people are gone. And so you realize that your friends have started to die. You're often, like in my support group, all 3 of us had spouses that died. And, so you begin to take it, as they say, compared to the alternative, and you begin to also, it turns out that the science tells us that the aging brain is different from what we would have expected. Our stereotypes are still that people are grumpy, rigid, and especially things like an old dog don't teach an old dog any tricks. They can't learn them. So I think all the present day myths get tossed out. So I think it's because the realities are our brain, our brain is much softer on us as we age. People are not so anxious, not so depressed. Their mental health, and this is a huge point that people don't know, that the mental health of older people is better than other generations. And as well as the happiness is better. There's this thing called I don't know if you've heard of it, the U curve, which is done by scientists and so on, that people are happy as in youth, but by the time they get to be 50, it's kind of bottoms out. And I think it's people are too busy. They don't have too much work, and no time. And they got the sandwich generation, people, their parents dying and their kids. So, but then every generation now, 60s are happier than 50s. And this is proved over and over again. 70s are happier than 60s. So if any of your people think they're not happier, just, they see if test it with them. And then just to finish that, and then of 80s, of course, are happier than the 70s. So this U curve, you go up in your happiness. And so it means that in actuality, if we could get the word out, which it isn't out, that people can look forward to be unexpectedly happy, it's really important, I think.
Yes, this is one of the reasons we're doing our project, Women Over 70, Aging Reimagined.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a question, though. The people that you interviewed, did they all come from different living situations?
Yes.
Were the circumstances different?
A lot of them were, I did people a lot of them lived in their own home. A lot of them lived in retirement communities. Probably it was a little oversampled with retirement communities because I started that way. But most of them, and then there were people in nursing homes, and I interviewed people that with bad health. And there's a chapter in the book on dementia, and I did interview people with the moderate stages, and so I tried to get a range of people, and I worked hard on getting people in the lower economic ranks too, because it is easier if you have money. It's easier, you get better health and so on. It's certainly easier. And so I worked hard to get a good sampling of differences, but of course it isn't pure.
I'm interested in your upside down, what you talked about, upside down parenting. And I think that could be a whole book in itself. And so what can you share with us about that phenomenon?
Well, I found, yes, and I think it's very important. And it was certainly, this phenomena is of parents at some point take over and become the authorities. And and it plays out in the 80s almost, the 80s are a time of transition. And it certainly played out among the 80-year-olds in terms of the pandemic, because very much I found that the people in their 50s and the 60s, the parents, the adult children of people in their 80s were trying to be the controlling person often, were very, very bossy and would tell their 80-year-olds that they could not go out to her. And so there was tension and conflict. And there was, again, research on this, and it turned out that the 80s generation is less anxious about and of course death is surrounding us. I mean, as I wrote, death is like our neighbor, but so we took it. So, and you can still see that many of us were able to not be so highly anxious, but it happens in the 70s for some people. In the 80s, there's issues like when mom should stop driving, and the kids are often saying, you shouldn't drive, mom. You've had 3, fender benders, and then you get tension, and then the people my age don't want to be bossed around, don't want to be give up driving. So this phenomena of upside down parenting is, I think, one of the things that is not really thought about. And so there's people that are very gracious and kids about helping people think it through. I mean, the kind of wiser people say, well, you just keep asking, like, well, Dad, do you think it's time? Have you thought about giving up your license? Rather than telling them that they have to do it. But it's something that has to be navigated for different people at different times. But and at some point in the last stage of aging, and when people are either sick or kind of close to dying, they give over completely to their kids, and and even by 80. Many people, most people are going to the doctors with a child if they're around. And before that, in the 70s, maybe they aren't. So there are some things you need to. It helps to know about, and then you can kind of manage it better, I think.
Well, when you talk about a whole new vision for old age, right, and that's larger than elder care or geriatrics, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, this is my new mission, to really get out that we need to reorganize society, that was set up, most of our institutions, most of our, the way towns are built, houses are built, the organizations run, they assume that 65 is the shut off. And with people now living up to 40 more years, that just isn't accurate. And just to give you a couple of examples of how the world is not built to meet the needs of older people. But when you are 80, though, there's a bunch of people in their 80s that the world isn't, the architecture, it doesn't fit. Like mostly the toilets are down like for kindergarten level, and some people, and the chairs, even in my retirement community, most of the chairs in the lobby outside our dining room, my new boyfriend, who turns out to be Peter from my support group.
So you had to sneak that in. Congratulations.
So that he's on a walker, so he can't he has to sit on the arms of the sofas because he can't get on them. And you'd think, and of course, and this is a retirement community that is trying to meet the needs of people. But so I think that, and we tell people to get off center stage, when there's 65, I do think, and it's that the older generations of the 70s and the 80s, they have so much to offer, and that we haven't made avenues. But the total revisioning is, I was saying that the people in their 50s are so too busy, that they just are pressed for time, just don't have, so that what we've done, there's the new thinking about old age, and is to mean that there are three different times in life. There's childhood, adulthood, and elderhood. And we've kind of not got it organized right in terms of learning, work, and leisure. We think of your learning goes in as when you're a child, your work goes when you're adult, and your leisure comes when you're over 65. And that's missing the boat for everybody. The children do well with a little more work put in. The adults do better with a little less work. And what if we had everyone in their adults have 30-hour weeks, and that was or really made part-time jobs available so people could come in and out when their mother gets sick. They could, and they didn't really lose everything the way it is now. It's sometimes they lose their job, sometimes they. So if we gave more leisure to adults, and everybody should get more learning. The adults need, we've learned that there are options for learning, but we don't make it easy. That if you learn and you have a job, like there's a woman I hear that is a young woman who's an adult, but for her to get her MBA, she has to add it on top. They don't really make it, they don't give you the time off. And then we get to the elders, who I'm interested in. Some people hate that word. I'm all right with it, but people here maybe groaning and saying, please don't use that word. But the people in their 70s and 80s, we need some leisure, but I think nobody really can enjoy playing golf for 40 years, and that they need more purpose. This is why you mentioned I'm really interested in helping people find a purpose that's a way to contribute to society. But they need also to go on learning. There's some retirement communities now that want people to take courses. And so that if we portioned out these three things, learning, work, and leisure, and I do think I worked, as I said, till I was 87. Yeah. And I worked, of course, psychotherapy was the perfect profession because I could cut down my caseload. As I got a little bit less energy, I could just making it smaller and smaller, and so I could make a graceful exit. But not of the, we aren't organized to make it easy for people to have part-time jobs. Although more people in their 80s are working, and the 70s, and I think it's good. But if the jobs were organized to be, flexible and part-time, it would be even better. So my vision is that we really take seriously this idea of trying to meet the needs of elders, the real needs, and we all, I think, hanker after contributing. And I think that people to feel good that when people do work in a soup kitchen one day a week, or there are always people in hospitals that are pushing the wheelchairs, and that this gives their life the zest that they need. But again, they have to kind of do it on their own, mostly finding.
And most of it is volunteerism.
Right. And so, yes, and we could be paying people if they realize it. Sometimes those stores, like, the old department stores would hire older women. It was one place they could, if you remember you could go into something like Macy's or Lord and Taylor. That'd the only place you'd see people in their 70s and 80s really employed. So that's my vision. And I really think that the key thing where I'm starting with is the whole idea of helping people find purpose, because that is something that I think people do yearn for that, and there's not much help out in the society for this.
Have you thought through how younger people can play a role in this now? How?
Well, that's so interesting. On my most recent blog, which if you look at it, I interviewed my 5 older grandchildren who were millennials, and I had asked them what did they think of us and what did we think of what did they think we thought of them, and then what I didn't answer. So you're asking me a question. What I did answer was how we, the older generation, can help the youngers, because I call that piece treading water, because there's a lot of in that age group 26 to 40, they feel they are not hitting the milestones of getting married and buying a house, and they're not really, they feel like we elders are looking down our noses at them and saying, so I wrote about that. Now I got to think about the other thing, because I haven't really, but of course I think there's so much possibility in relationships. And I do think one of the things I think is being close. If you're lucky enough to have grandchildren, if you're not lucky enough to finding other people's children that are, relating to younger generation in some way, is invigorating and brings wisdom to both sides, so it's a really important thing, again, that we can foster to make lives enriched.
Yes. Katharine, do you have any other questions for Katharine?
Well, I just was, I was really fascinated with that basically you found, I think this contributes to people's sense of happiness, is they don't spend a lot of time dwelling on the past or their regrets. So that spoke to me. And the women, I think especially, you said, do the inner work of transition. They really do that deeper inner work. Maybe men do too, but I think you kind of singled out the women. And then you identified 5 themes that you said really matter to people in their 80s. Okay. You want me to tell you what they are?
Yeah, tell me what they are.
Let me see. Hold on. Oh, okay. The importance of family.
Yeah.
Following your dreams. Yeah. Serving others. Living in the present. Yeah. And remembering that relationships matter.
Yeah, those are the themes that I really think, we found out. Thank you for reminding me. But we've seen in the pandemic how important keeping connections with other people, and that's why I worry about people in their houses, if they're in the country and they don't see anybody. It's not good for our health. We've learned that people die. They've got now, when you're isolated, people are unhappy, and we do have to make the effort to connect. Yeah, but living in the present is interesting because it's something that most of us didn't think about when we were younger, and I am very much enamored with how important that is. And, the kind of sense of learning meditations as a way to get you to not be always thinking about looking before and after. And I found that out from my people that I interviewed, because they didn't have regrets. I asked everyone, what are your regrets? And I couldn't believe it at the beginning. They said, well, I used to have regrets, but now I'm in my 80s. I've kind of made my peace with my dad, who was like absent, and I've kind of made, the things that didn't go right. I used to think, well, I should have gone to a different college or something. But people kind of make their peace with their life and are able. And I noticed this too in my retirement community. People, we're not old friends, and we're from new people, but nobody says, well, tell me about, like what you were saying, my life story. People don't, they talk about the chairs on the balcony, or in the terrace, are better than the old ones, and and what's going on in Ukraine. We are living in the present. Mm-hmm. And I also see that older people don't make plans like for 5 years from now, I'll take a trip to, Yucatan. They limit themselves. And of course, the life expectancy is one of the things that people don't understand, that most people, we did look, during the COVID, we think the life expectancy in the country went down from like 79 to 78. But women when you get to be 80, the average woman has 9 more years, and every year you live, it gets bigger. So that I'm 87, and my life expectancy is 6 years now. It's not that I'm on my last year, because I'm almost close to 9. But so that we have this a good long life to do things with, and we really, I think happiness lies in not looking before and after, but to leave. That's a cliche now. Live each day as they come, but it has wisdom in it.
Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you so much, Katharine. Dr. Katharine Esty, we really do appreciate your sharing your wisdom with us, and wish you good luck with your new book, and we'll have to revisit this at some time.
I would love that. And just, if it's interesting, the book's going to come out in paperback. If some people are having trouble, it's kind of difficult to find, right? There are only a few copies on Amazon, right? But it is, going to be in a paperback. And so anyway, I appreciated this. This was a good, interesting conversation. And I'll have to go. I don't know where I wrote that about those 5 themes, but I'll have to.
Page 165.
Okay. So,
Or 156.
Yes.
okay.
Thank you so much. This is just really, really important work.
Yes,
And
it
thank
is.
you for having me. I was pleased to be here. Really.
Thank you, Katharine.
Okay.